Good morning and welcome to Morning Java, brought to you as always by Get Go Cafe and Market, where Dale, as always, they give you fresh food, easy to get service, and great clean service. You can get curbside pickup. Get Go, they've been helping us out all through COVID-19 and quarantining.
Yeah, absolutely. Get over to GetGo and get everything that you need. You can fuel up both your car and yourself.
There you go, Dale. Well, Dale, let's talk into a story that you just had. It's up today on DKPittsburghSports.com, and you were going over the history, like talking about Ben Roethlisberger's elbow injury and other players and quarterbacks that had to deal with similar injuries. This, of course, is question number one for Steelers fans. What were some of your findings when going over players who had to recover from this type of injury?
Well, first of all, there aren't many quarterbacks that have suffered elbow injuries which is kind of surprising. When you look at the position and the throwing that goes on there, I think largely because, throwing a football is a more natural movement than throwing a baseball. We see, 50 pitchers every year in Major League Baseball need Tommy John surgery. It's just not very common among quarterbacks. But if you look at it, you had Jake Delhomme back in 2007. He came back and played after that and led the Panthers to a 12-4 record in 2008. Before that, you had Joe Montana, had the elbow injury in '92, came back in '93 after he was traded to the Chiefs and led them to an AFC championship and played 2 more years after that. Everybody wants to look at this and say, well, what about Terry Bradshaw? The big difference there is Terry Bradshaw snuck off on his own, didn't tell the Steelers that his elbow was bothering him, and went to a local doctor in Louisiana and had a surgery done without telling the Steelers, and just did it. And it was 1982. The surgeries weren't as prevalent then as they are now. And he most certainly didn't go and have a specialist work on him, which is kind of crazy if you think about it. That these days, Roethlisberger went to one of the best guys in the world to get this thing done, and everything is on schedule. I would also throw it, as I did in the story, Peyton Manning's issue wasn't a shoulder; it was a neck.
Mm-hmm,
Or
right.
it wasn't an elbow; it was a neck. You could argue that the neck injury was a bigger deal, and yet he was able to come back from that and play, for several years after having that surgery.
No, I agree. I mean, that's the thing that there's been a lot of misinformation spread about this. Some people thought it was a shoulder injury, but it's really an elbow injury. And I think it's very interesting on your part to go and do the research on players that have gone through this because, one, it's not as common as you might think with quarterbacks. But two, you look at the history of guys that have had to go through this. You got guys that bounce back, and the one thing that might be different, Dale. And I want to. My next question is this: do you think that Ben's age plays any difference into this? Because you're talking about a guy who's at 38 years old. He's on the back of his. And a lot of quarterbacks in the past didn't play this long because that was just not how it worked in the NFL.
Well, I mean, Manning underwent his surgery. I think he was 36 when he had his surgery. Montana was 35 or 36 at the time of his surgery. Delhomme was, I believe, 33. So, these are wear and tear injuries. That's basically what they are. So, as we start to see more quarterbacks play later into their careers, you're going to see more injuries like these because that's what happens. That's why so many pitchers in Major League Baseball suffer these things because they are a wear and tear type injury. And, the differences between surgeries, when I first started covering the NFL, if a guy tore an ACL, that was essentially a 2-year injury.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't come back for 2 years. Then, we started seeing guys come back quicker and quicker and quicker with that. Now it's not uncommon to see a guy, who tears an ACL at the end of a football season be back by the time they start OTAs. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's just such the advances in medicine have been so great that, what they were doing in 1982, going back to the Bradshaw injury, is pretty much akin to Civil War type surgeries. They were basically taking the saw and just cut it off and move on. That doesn't happen anymore.
I mean, that's the one thing that you have to say is that you look at of all the times that people have gone through this and they've come back from it, medicine has never been as advanced as it is today. And I think that Ben Roethlisberger, with all the specialists that he could have gone to get himself ready, he's in the best of positions to make his return. All right, Dale, last week we got to see you've been doing your rankings of different position groups across the AFC North, and then you touched on the offensive line. Now, this is a particular strength of the Steelers because of the experience on the line, and you had
Also a sore spot among fans who think that the Steelers' offensive line is garbage, and they could not be more wrong.
yeah, that's bizarre to me. I kind of look at this and I'm like, how do you think that? I mean, I get that people are upset because they just saw the Steelers go 8-8, and they saw, but again, Mason Ruff, Devin Hodges, you're working with quarterbacks that are unfamiliar with your protection schemes. There's a lot of things that go into that, and teams are trying to take away your run at will because they're saying we dare you to beat us with these quarterbacks that are underperforming. But in your rankings, you had the Steelers at number 1, the Ravens at number 2, the Browns at number 3, and the Bengals at number 4. For all the haters out there that think that Dale's crazy for the Dale, take it away. Why are you right and they wrong?
Well, Marshall Yonda is no longer playing football. Everybody who thinks that the Ravens offensive line is suddenly going to just continue rolling right along like they did last year, they're not realizing what kind of player Yonda was. Yonda was the best guard in football.
Yep.
Quentin Nelson, I don't care. Marshall Yonda was the best guard in football. And losing him, to me, is the biggest non-quarterback move of the offseason. I mean, you just don't replace that guy. And they've thrown they threw several draft picks at that position. They went out and brought in some new guys. None of them are Marshall Yonda. The Ravens are good at the tackle position. On the interior line, they're not very good. And if you look at the Steelers' offensive line, you've got two guys who are quantified stars at the guard and center position. The tackles are pretty good. They're not great, but they're pretty. They're slightly above average. And then you look at you're going to plug somebody in at left guard, whether that be Wisniewski, whether you move Filer over there. And I think Filer would be a better guard than tackle, but he's still, as I said, an above average, slightly above average tackle. I think that their line is going to be better than what Baltimore's is right now. I've had people say, well, what about Cleveland? Well, Cleveland's got. They were starting from ground zero, basically, with their offensive line. It was awful. It was one of the worst 5 lines in the league last year.
Yeah, they got torn apart. And they tried to add they did add Ryan Conklin at right tackle from the Tennessee Titans, and he's a good name to get, but that doesn't solve all the other problems that they have on this.
The thing about Jack Conklin is, I've talked to guys in Nashville, and they said, this was before anybody had signed Jack Conklin. This was at the Combine. And, had talked to some guys from Nashville, and they said, look, people aren't going to realize he's an above average run blocker, but as a pass blocker, he's below average. He's just not a very good pass blocker. And so somebody's going to completely overpay for him. And that's exactly what the Browns did. And again, I like Jedrick Willis as well. But you're going to take him, who he played right tackle his entire college career, and you're going to make him move to the left side. And, our friend Craig Wolfley said that's like learning how to wipe your behind with the opposite hand. It does take some time, and there's been no off season to work on that stuff for him.
Yeah, that's the thing. Rookies are going to have a huge challenge, but you're right. I mean, on the flip side of it, we saw how T.J. Watt struggled from blitzing from the opposite side that he played in Wisconsin, and it wasn't until he switched to the other side that we saw his numbers really start flying off the charts, and him being the first round draft pick they picked him to be. It's not all guaranteed that just because Willis is a great offensive lineman in college, it's going to translate right to with the Browns. And I'm still not settled that the rest of their offensive line is going to be of much help. You're looking across the board. People forget that when, a lot of times players like Villanueva, when he's at his best, it's usually because the rest of the offensive line is doing very well. And that kind of takes the pressure off of him to have to be an anchor for the offensive line. If the rest of the offensive line is struggling and Willis is still adjusting to being the left tackle and figuring out how to work into your drops, when the pattern of when your feet are going back and syncing it up with the footwork of his teammates, that's no guarantee that their offensive line is going to do that well. And with Baker Mayfield, they need to be able to give him time to throw in that pocket because when he's under pressure, it's over.
Yeah, he just doesn't play well under pressure. And again, rookies struggle. I still ranked Willis at number 9 overall among the top 10 offensive lineman in the division. I think I was being very kind there. I like him as a prospect. I think he's very good, but it is going to take time for that guy to come along. And again, when you look at that Steelers offensive line, 4 of them ranked in my top 10 in the guys in the division. Try to argue that. Try to argue that there aren't 4 of the Steelers offensive linemen in that top 10 in the division. You can't. It's inarguable.
I agree. I mean, these are guys that have experience. And David DeCastro, and more to your point about Marshall Yanda, if you took David DeCastro off this Steelers line right now, it would be devastating. And that's what losing Marshall Yanda was for the Ravens, losing an all-star type of guard that's been just a pillar for your offense to be able to depend on. I also wonder how that's going to work for their run game. They did that a lot with Mark Ingram and RG3, and they just got Dobbins out of Ohio State. So there's a lot of questions there, but I think you make a lot of good points. The Steelers, we know what you have in DeCastro, you know what you have in Pouncey. Villanueva and Fowler have been with the team, so they know what they have in them. Biggest question is who steps to left guard, and if it's Fowler, does a core 4 banner step up there? But you're talking about maybe one question mark out of 5 players compared to some of these teams where you're still figuring out I'm not so sure about these guys.
Yeah, and that's why I think Wisniewski's going to be the starter at left guard to at least start the season. I think because of the lack of perhaps very little training camp, fewer preseason games this year, the easy thing for coaches to do is going to be to take the guy and plug and play him because you know what he is.
Okay, Dale. So, as always, when there's a player available on the market, Steelers fans want to know, hey, Steelers, can we go get him? And this week, that player is safety Jamal Adams. And Jamal Adams, very talented safety, one of the best in the league, but he's told the Jets he's ready to move on. It's being spread across social media. But as usual, we got to tell y'all to hit the chill button because the Steelers aren't doing this. Dale, can you explain to Steelers fans why they should stop talking about Jamal Adams? Come to the Steelers.
$20 million. That's what Jamal Adams wants. Now, there's no way he's going to get $20 million, and that's going to also be another part of this. You got a player who's saying that he wants to be paid $20 million a year at the safety position. That would be, $6 or $7 million more than the top safety is being paid in the league right now. So you're going to trade for a guy who's already unhappy in one situation, and you're going to trade for him, and he's going to say, no, I want $20 million. Well, who can afford that? There aren't many. I mean, if you start looking at it, he had a list of 7 teams that he wanted to go to or would sign off on, one being the Eagles. Well, right now the Eagles have $24 million in cap space, so they could make that move. But if you look at SpotTrack's salary cap for next year, the Eagles are $58 million over the cap next year.
Yeah.
They got to make moves. So you have to balance these kind of things out. It's the same reason why, right now the Steelers are $5.7 million under the salary cap. Somebody on my Cam Hayward story last week said, boy, I'd hate to see, the Steelers have to cut him and he signs with the Patriots. The Patriots have $1.3 million in cap space right now. They can't sign anybody. They're stuck right up against it, and they don't have a quarterback that they're paying. Money is a factor. It's always a factor, and there aren't many teams that can take on Jamal Adams and pay him. That's what made the Minkah Fitzpatrick deal so attractive to the Steelers, is the fact that they had him under reasonable control for the next 3 seasons when they traded for him. Yes, you give up a first-round pick, but that's why you gave up a first-round pick for him. That's the other part of the Jamal Adams situation here, because if I'm a team, I'm not offering the Jets a first-round draft pick for him because I got to pay him. Exactly. So now you're going to offer a second or third-round pick for Jamal Adams. If I'm the Jets, I say, no, I'm not taking that, because if we let him play this thing out, we're going to get a third-round compensatory pick for him. Exactly. And we get to keep the player for another year.
Mm-hmm. And that's the thing, they can play hardball and be like, look, Jamal, you don't want to play, that's on you. Let's see how that plays out. Because however much he says he doesn't want to play, if he can hold out, and then okay, well, fine, we'll still get our comp pick for you. But you can't just you can't just bully us to say, hey, we're gonna get you out of here, and get nothing big in return for you. I do think that the answer has to be, for Jamal Adams, I think that he should try to play out the rest of his contract in New York. I mean, hey, if a suitor comes and offers New York a great deal, or there's a market for it, great. But like you said, I think that's really tough, especially now. If this was back in February or March,
nobody knows what the cap's going to be next year. Nobody knows what the situation is. The other thing to keep an eye on with this, and this is going to come into play with Dalvin Cook as well, if he holds out as he says he's going to. The NFL changed the rules in this new CBA that you can get bigger fines, and they will hold you to these fines if you start holding out days in training camp. So the players are up against it if they want to, actually have a holdout. They're going to actually lose money if they skip training camp.
Yeah, there's a lot more to weigh in there. But again, it's like, their leverage right now for a lot of things. Cam Hayward said it to the media last week. He said, no contract talks have happened because the Steelers. How can the Steelers bank on anything right now with whether or not this season happens, with whether or not with a salary cap will increase or decrease next year? There's so many things up in the air, and especially most teams, you've solidified your roster, at least your picks, going into the guys who you think are going to play for this upcoming season by now. It's June. There's the only rare occasional grabs are like the way the Steelers grabbed Joe Hayden after he was cut last year. But you're not going to see a whole lot of teams with a whole lot of space to make these moves. Jamal Adams might just have to tough this out. If we get football back, then he tough this out, play out the contract, have a good year, and then get his payday in free agency. But right now, pushing for a trade, I just see a hard time someone coming with the price that the Jets would jump at, and it's definitely not going to be coming from the Steelers.